Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. I am Daita Sergi, Education Programs Manager with ESHI, and I'll be the moderator today. It is my pleasure to welcome you all. As many of you know, ESHI's mission is to inspire and catalyze higher education to lead the global sustainability transformation. We are an international association with about 1,000 members spread across more than 20 countries, including Belize and Korea. We serve as the professional home for campus sustainability staff, but we offer resources for everyone in higher education. We provide an expansive collection of online resources, networking tools, and educational events such as today's webinar and an annual conference and expo, which will be held in Pittsburgh October 2nd to the 5th. Registration is open, so make sure to register to join us in Pittsburgh. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Everyone in the audience is on mute, but please feel free to ask questions or provide comments at any point during the presentation. You can do that by typing your questions or comments in the questions pane in the control panel on your screen. If you have additional questions, please email them to education@eshi.org and we will get back to you. At the end of the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to provide feedback regarding today's presentation. We take your suggestions into account when planning for future webinars, so please do provide this feedback. Please note this webinar is being recorded. If you experience technical difficulties or have to leave early, you and others can view the recording later. The recording with the presentation materials will all be available in the Campus Sustainability Hub after the live broadcast. At this time, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. But before I go into their introductions, I want to let everybody know that this week is actually the National Pollinator Week. So our webinar is even more special because we are able to provide it during this week. Phyllis Stiles is the founder and director of Bee City USA and Bee Campus USA. She's learning all she can about how to support the hard-working pollinators that sustain our planet. She has served universities and nonprofits in fields ranging from natural resources and farmland protection to civic leadership development in communities from the Blue Ridge Mountains to West Africa to the Mississippi Delta. Emily O'Hara is a sophomore pursuing a major in political science with a minor in English. She is the coordinator of the UConn Save the Bees campaign and helped UConn become designated as a Bee Campus USA in the spring of 2017. Jackie Hampstead is environmental specialist at UNC Asheville since May 2015. UNC Asheville has been a certified Bee Campus since early 2016, and Jackie is also a graduate of Bee City USA's Certified Pollinator Advocate course. Elaine Cole is the Sustainability Coordinator at Portland Community College's Rock Creek campus and is responsible for the overall coordination of sustainability practices and programs. She was instrumental in getting the campus apiary started in 2014 and serves as the college-wide chair of the Bee Campus USA Committee to increase pollinator habitat and education. More information about all presenters is found on the ESHI website under this webinar listing. It is my pleasure to welcome all attendees and thank you for joining us today. At this time, I'm going to turn things over to Phyllis to get us started.
Hi, everybody, and happy National Pollinator Week. It's pretty exciting every year when our campuses and our cities across the country join in to celebrate our pollinators in a variety of ways. We're grateful to ESHI for hosting this webinar, and we hope that you benefit from it. We won't be able to cover everything we'd like to cover today in the time allowed. For example, we won't get into all of the important reasons that we need to reverse pollinator decline, but we're all available after the webinar to answer your questions if they do arise. So these are our presenters, and I'm grateful to them. They represent 3 of the campuses that have gone through the application process and become Bee Campus USA affiliates. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the history of Bee Campus USA, our mission, and our application process. But before I go into that, I want you to know something that has just recently happened, and we could not be more excited. Bee City USA and Bee Campus USA have become initiatives of the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, based out of Portland, Oregon, where one of our presenters is today. And so that will give us many more resources than we've had for the past 6 years. It will give us much greater capacity to better serve our affiliates. Our interest in pollinator decline started back in 2007 when the breaking news came out that colonies were collapsing. They didn't have a name for it, but beekeepers were coming out after winter and discovering that their worker bees were gone. The queen bees were there, some brood may have been there, but the worker bees had mysteriously disappeared. And that caught my attention, and I became a beekeeper. And as it is for so many people, honeybees became my gateway pollinator, introducing me to the many other thousands of species of pollinators around the world. We're also familiar with the decline in monarchs. They've declined by as much as 90% over the past 2 decades. So that has stirred a lot of interest in pollinator conservation across the world. Last year, I think it was 2016, the UN commissioned a report to offer policy suggestions for countries around the world in terms of pollinators and their role in food production and pollination generally. And so that report, among many things, let us know that 40% of our invertebrate pollinators, our insect pollinators, are at risk right now of extinction. So with us facing all of this pollinator decline, it would be easy to point fingers and try to blame somebody else. And you can make a very long list of the different groups that you might want to blame. But rather than doing that, back in 2012, when I and a group of folks here in Asheville, North Carolina, decided we wanted to do something that might not already be underway. And so we decided that we would just point our fingers right at ourselves and say, what could we do instead of blaming anybody else? Our mantra became the famous Margaret Mead quote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Our mission is to galvanize communities to sustain pollinators by providing them with healthy habitat rich in a variety of native plants and free to nearly free of pesticides. And I want you to notice that beautiful leafcutter bee on a lupin flower. You can tell leafcutter bees and mason bees because they carry their pollen under their abdomens instead of their back legs. To date, since we launched in 2018, we've certified 70 cities across the country, and there's a list for you there of all the cities and even an Air Force base and a county that we've certified to date, and more coming on board every month. And here's our list of certified campuses. We were inspired to start the campus program by Southern Oregon University. Mike Oxendine there, the head of their grounds department, asked us to do it, and he said he would help us design the program, and he and his staff certainly did, and they've been a resource to us ever since. What I want to point out to you in this list of 46 campuses is that you'll see small and large campuses, research institutions, land grant institutions, religiously affiliated institutions, community colleges, individual campuses, and in one case, we have all the campuses of a community college system. I'd like to explain why we decided to call our organization Bee City and Bee Campus USA. We did that because They're the workhorses. The 20,000 plus bee species of the world are considered the pollinator workhorses because they intentionally collect pollen. It's their only protein source, unlike most pollinators that are attracted to the flower's nectar. So we don't call it Bee City and Bee Campus USA in honor of the honeybee necessarily, although she's a very, very important pollinator. It's a tribute to all of the bee species in the world, as well as the other pollinators. Our application process involves 7 simple steps, which are on our website at beecityusa.org. And then you just find the application drop-down menu for campuses. And this is what our group is going to talk about today. So I'm just giving you a heads up. These are the 7 commitments that you make when you become a Bee Campus USA. And we won't follow this order, but Emily and Elaine and Jackie will address each of the commitments during their talks. I want you to know that you don't have to have your habitat plan completed when you apply to be a Bee Campus USA. That's a real important role that your committee can play, and so you'll hear more about that later. But many groups ask that. And also, you don't have to pay the application fee until you are approved as a certified Bee Campus USA. The fees range from $100 to $500 depending on the size of your student body. And so all of that's on the application form and on the application explanation page on our website. The form is an easy Google form that you can fill out, and we're available to take your questions throughout the process. And with that, I'll turn it over to Emily.
Okay, thank you. Just a second while I get my screen up. Okay. All right. All right, is my screen visible, just to check?
Yes.
Great, thank you so much. All right, thank you, Phyllis. Thank you so much for that great introduction and for having me to present in such an amazing week for pollinators. I wish that National Pollinator Week was during the academic year so I could celebrate it with my students, my fellow students at UConn. But my name is Emily O'Hara, and I am a student at UConn Storrs. I'm actually a rising junior, so I finished my sophomore year. I coordinated the Save the Bees campaign at UConn through the UConn PIRG chapter, and I did that for the entire year for 2017. So I'm no longer the campaign coordinator, but I'm proud to say that it's still running and will be running into the fall. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that campaign just to give a brief introduction. But to tell you a little bit about UConn, we are a research university. We have about 20,000 undergrads at our main campus and 30,000 in total. That includes regional campuses and graduate students. We have about 4,000 acres at our main campus and at our regional campus. And we started as a Storrs agricultural school. So we have a lot of land and we have an agricultural background. And I can really think of no better place to have a bee campus. It's just so perfect. And to top that off, we have a lot of green reputation awards. We have a green rating at our dining halls, and we are the first bee campus in Connecticut. So I'm proud to say that we got that certification. That was really exciting for us. So let me talk a little bit about what I've done. So I am the incoming vice chair for the student PIRGs, and I've been involved with them since my freshman year. What are the PIRGs? If you haven't heard of them, we're a public interest research group, and it's a student division of the national public interest research groups. We are student run and student funded, doing all nonprofit, nonpartisan activism. So this includes things such as voter registration, environmental protection, hunger and homelessness. We're known as anything from the democracy and the vote people to the bee people. And I'm proud to have been the bees girl for a full year. But it's a really fun organization, and these students are passionate about politics and activism, but what I had never planned to be was the Bees Girl. Somebody had told me that it was a really fun campaign to work on because PIRG had run a Save the Bees campaign, and we'd run it in the past, but I decided to take it on in the spring with the goal of becoming a certified Bee Campus USA and getting about 500 photo petitions encouraging the EPA to help pollinators and establish some kind of regulation. So a lot of our work is more political, but we're nonpartisan. We want everybody to participate in getting pollinators protected. So since the reestablishment of the campaign, because it's run on and off throughout different semesters, we've had 2 campaign coordinators. So I've been one, and one of my tactical coordinators took over when I left. And we have a new coordinator starting in the fall who's excited to establish new pollinator campuses or pollinator habitats on our campus. So we have 3 active chapters in Connecticut and are active in 14 states. But what I'm really proud of is the fact that other PIRG chapters, having seen the work done at UConn, have reached out to us to ask how they can participate and kind of base it off of the model that we set at UConn. So I was really happy to see that growth. And if saving the bees isn't really a way to find new opportunities and get people excited about something and, participating in a cause, I really don't know what it is. It's a lot of fun. So to talk about implementing Bee Campus at UConn, the first step that we wanted to tackle was establishing our committee and developing a habitat plan, which is actually much more challenging than we've thought. If you look at this picture, that's me with our little sign in our office, and the only 2 boxes we don't have checked ended up being the biggest tasks for us. So those took a full semester to really get underway. And that's just to give you an idea of the scope of this project. It takes some time, but it's really worthwhile and a lot of fun, because you'll see on the right, that's students at our first table we had, which was Valentine's themed, and they are just beaming. So that's kind of how I want to start with the committee. Now, establishing the committee at UConn, we wanted to meet the requirements for the school as well as for Bee Campus. So Bee Campus's requirements, if you haven't seen them yet, require meeting regularly, having that pollinator habitat protection plan, which is so crucial, including important faculty and staff, such as the landscape director, sustainability and environmental policy offices, and creating a pollinator-friendly plant list and an integrated pest management plan. And you have to get all of this out there so that's viewable for the public. We also had some school-specific requirements. When we met with our dean, she made it very clear that we needed to include as many environmental and administrative groups as possible. Because if something's going to happen to change campus policy, it's got to have as many people included as you can. It's going to change a lot. And we had to send regular updates to the committee and check in with our crucial committee members. And we found that the Office of Environmental Policy was really our go-to resource. They were the ones that were like working closely with us, constantly emailing, and we'd go over their office to check in. So we found that the Sustainability Office and the Office of Environmental Policy were our best resource. But the committee as a whole functioned as a toolbox to us. It's a check on the work we're doing so that we know we're doing the right work. We're not just going blindly as a bunch of activists who range anywhere from not knowing anything about bees to really being majors in plant science and landscape development. So we want to be sure we're doing work that's going to be beneficial. And it's a way to keep our departments updated. Now, it's student driven, and because we are students, one of the biggest challenges is communicating effectively with those higher up in administration. Our primary focus was creating this committee that could be representative, but that we could also use to build a network. It was kind of the glue for our Bee Campus USA application, because if we hadn't really talked to all the people we did through our committee, we probably wouldn't have gotten it in within a semester. So it was our organizing network, and this was a chance for students who had never done activism to do anywhere from grassroots to grass top. So I was super excited about that. The leader of the committee, as far as students go, depends on who's coordinating the campaign. So I led the committee for the year that I worked on the campaign, but that was taken over by my successor. And he was the one working closely with any departments involved with us. Students really are the driving force, because that kind of comes from our work as activists and as student-run, student-funded activists. It's a fundamental value to the organization that I'm in. So we wanted students to be the ones kind of in control, and we wanted them to be the liaisons from the campaign to administrators. And that's, like I said, all from PIRG. The departments that were represented on our original list were the landscape department. We had grad students from the plant science department, a really influential individual in the plant science department, a professor who has been an incredible resource, as she actually informs a lot of the information that goes into their integrated pest management plan. And we also worked closely with the Office of Public Engagement, who helped us create our our service learning projects. And a lot of the work at UConn was done for us already. I've linked the IPM plan at UConn, and because we're a research university, a lot of professors are really, concerned about protecting the environment, and their research revolves around pollinators. Like I said, that one professor, she does a lot of work with non-toxic pesticides and with pollinators, and so that's a primary concern for her. Honestly, this department has been advocating since long before we ran the campaign. It was just a chance for students to have a foray into it. So now I want to talk about our service learning project development. Again, I'm going to go through the requirements. We want, for B Campus, you have to annually sponsor and track the service learning or the service projects to enhance pollinator habitats. At UConn, service learning is very rigorous, and it was much more rigorous than I ever expected. You really have to be able to track the academics, the engagement, the awareness. And here we have students from the campaign and from from school who are in a class, Plant Science 125 at UConn, which is insects, food, and culture. And we work closely with that class to develop our service learning project, but there they are cleaning out bee boxes in the fall. Service learning has really been a guide to us, but because of the unique nature of our projects and our campaign, and because we're so focused on advocacy, a lot of the time we just would consult the office before we take on our own challenges. So I would meet closely with the director of service learning to talk to her about what she thought we should be doing, what courses we should be meeting with. So like I said, we worked in tandem with insects, food, and culture. And that really helped us to reach out into a classroom and have students, getting some credit for their work. We had one student who was doing photography, so he would come and take pictures of the volunteering while actually building a habitat, which was very exciting. We were happy to have him there capturing our experiences. But it also let us have more of an avenue into the administrative side. So there's me as a little baby freshman presenting at my first conference or summit, I guess you could call it. It was very small, but it was for exposition. It was the service learning exposition. And that was when we were still in the process of applying, but it allowed us to meet with a lot of different departments. I got to connect with different organizations on campus, some students who were doing non-toxic pesticides and entrepreneurship, students who were working worldwide to establish agricultural communities that would provide better food for people. And all of this ties back to pollinators. So I found myself and the rest of the campaign getting more and more connected to the campus through service learning, but that service learning connection really only came from our committee, because that's how I established those connections, and we met with our administrators. So that's how that tied together. The service learning projects we wanted to develop were aimed at reducing stigma and increasing access to education on pollinators, because a lot of people are afraid of bees and afraid of pollinators, and the assumptions like, why do you want to save the bees? Now, Phyllis gave just a great introduction into why with such declining numbers, but this allowed us to build a network for more presentations. So I actually was able to give a graduate presentation as well. So with implementing the service learning, we had a pollinator habitat created at our local student farm. It was really just a great way to get out and actually build an environment. We introduced some new shrubs. We had other students from across the campus working with us, and it was a chance for some community education. So in addition to actually having the farm present to us when we came, we went out and presented. So I did my graduate course presentation, which was one really big achievement according to the service learning office, because I hadn't realized that is a form of service learning, doing community education. We also have a plan to go into daycares and elementary schools, because teachers are really excited about teaching their students about this. And if college students can be the ones teaching it and see, oh, it's big college kids coming into our class to talk about something they're excited about, suddenly bees don't seem so scary, and they seem really vital to our survival and the survival of our planet. We had a little bit of course integration, not as much as I would have liked, but we integrated with that plant science course, and we also had them advocating on our behalf when we were doing different presentations, and we actually had a pollinator panel come, so they were able to help inform the panel. We had a professor speak on the panel. So really, that was one way that we were able to work with a course closely, and we had students from the course who got credit for working with us. So that's how the service learning element came in. For the future, we're going to be establishing habitats on campus for pollinators, so students can actually learn about where their food comes from, and that's coming in the fall with our new coordinator. I'm very excited to see what she does. Now, just to talk about the pollinator-friendly curriculum we established, the requirements for Bee Campus were to at least biennially offer a pollinator protection course, and that could be for an on-campus or for a post-grad class, or like I said, a workshop or course offered through continuing education. School-specific requirements, those didn't really exist. Classes had already been established, which is one of the great things about going to what was formerly just an agricultural school. The standards that we have for the classes meet the standards of a research institution. So our curriculum is all about research, and it's with professors who are doing research. I've listed some of the courses here, and this is how I went about it. I just did some research, and I had students already on my campaign who were in the biology department, who were in, they were in landscape development, and they were the ones directing me to different professors and courses, and they were already in them. So I found out that a lot of courses already do advocacy and do presentations on pollinators, and they get really creative. I've seen signs around campus and projects around campus where students are doing similar work to what we're doing, just less political. That one professor I talked about was really, like I said, a liaison between her department head and other professors. This kind of allowed that first step of curriculum service learning integration. The Office of Environmental Policy was also, like I said, hugely helpful in creating relationships with faculty and departments. And I think if we were to go back and do this again, I would make it more grass tops. I am a student, so it's a little bit harder to meet with faculty and staff, not just because it's often intimidating. I mean, when I was a freshman, the idea of asking a professor to, let me be a part of your curriculum was terrifying. But now I think just getting time to be able to meet with someone is hard. And that's one of the challenges we really faced with our committee was finding time to meet. It's not as simple as it seems to get people together, especially really important people on campus. And with our reputation as a fairly green school, those people are busy all the time, and our school is constantly growing. So if I were to go back and do it again, like I said, I would try and focus more on the upper level administrators first, and while also having my campaign do some grassroots. So our integrated pest management plan, like I said, was done by that professor. Low toxic, non-toxic pesticides, the removal of invasive species, and with our service learning projects, we introduced more native species. Already at UConn, we don't have any invasive species aside from we have a crop of corn that is an invasive species, but we're working on getting non-invasive species of plants on campus. Students were getting credit. We had a panel, I have a picture there of myself with the presenters, a pollinator protection panel, and students got credit for coming to our panel to observe and ask questions, and we were able to get students to sign petitions, and the work that we did over the course of a year informed our pollinator protection panel celebration. And I call it a celebration because this really rounded out a year of Bee Campus work. We had started it in the spring and we were ending it in the fall. And it was a way for us to kind of pat ourselves on the back and also learn a little bit. I learned a lot about pollinators that day, and I got to meet the state apiary inspector. He was one of the presenters. So that's how we kind of worked with their department, but also broadened our course to something more than just being within academics and with extracurriculars. It was really a community experience. Now, developing connections was really essential to the implementation of the Bee Campus USA program and the application itself. We needed to work with faculty, staff, administrators. We also needed to work with students, and we are student run. So a lot of the times it was just students who were doing the on the ground work. They were the ones designing fun flyers, and they were the ones who were getting out and encouraging their friends. But then we got this symbiotic relationship because students need the administration and administration needs the students. So while we were serving and creating the committees, the administration was the one, handling the policy and signing off on our applications. So we needed to make it a really welcoming environment and one in which everybody was on the same playing field for once. And I think that's kind of an intimidating process for a lot of students. So I really learned a lot about creating connections. And I think that's just the most important takeaway I got from this, is that connections are key. Without this kind of relationship, I don't think we would have really had a successful application. So these steps of the application really did seem daunting at first to me. If you saw, I mean, next to that sign, everything was almost checked off, but the two biggest parts weren't done yet. And that took a full year to get completed. But really, because we had a campaign of energetic students who love pollinators and love the idea of helping to protect them, a supportive network of faculty and staff in such a green, excited, energetic environment, environmentally focused school, and this committee we actually helped to build, and we really had a clear objective for a cause we cared about. We had a triumphant year for pollinator advocacy at UConn. So thank you so much for listening to my portion. I'm going to hand it on over to Jackie.
Thanks, Emily. Am I up and running?
You're good.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Jackie Hamstead. I'm at UNC Asheville. I'm the environmental specialist, and the Bee campus commitments I'm going to talk to you about today are implementing your pollinator habitat plan and creating effective signage on campus. Just a brief background on our university. We're a small liberal arts school with about 3,700 students. We're considered an urban campus, and just like 1 mile north of downtown Asheville, which was the very first Bee City, USA. We manage about 400 acres, and there is a strong culture of environmental advocacy on our campus. Environmental studies is the most popular major, and biology is the third most popular major. And we were the 8th Bee campus, certified in March of 2016. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is developing and implementing your pollinator habitat plan, and I'm going to go through all of these individually, but these were kind of just some goals and policies that helped us implement our plan. And the images here show one of our pollinator meadows that was sponsored by Burt's Bees. Here's the planting phase. And then we planted with plugs because we did have the grant funding to do that. We sometimes have to use seed for cost savings. But you can see year 1 was already pretty well established. And then in year 2, it looked like a pretty well-developed garden. So one of the things we try to do in our pollinator habitat plan is to mimic natural communities, so we can really kind of just create a functioning ecosystem. So up here on the top right is one of the mountain balds that we have about 30 minutes north of campus, and then just below it is one of our pollinator meadows that's in front of our administration building, that is supposed to resemble that. And on the left are the wheelchair ramp to get to our student union. It's kind of exposed to wind and heat, and it's similar to Johns Rock and Pisgah Forest, which is also nearby. So we try to mimic that community there. Similarly, planting natives is probably the best thing you can do for your pollinators. And just like we have a plant list that we use, we also have do not plant lists. Here's just some examples of the trees that are prohibited on campus. And one of the ways we kind of share those native seeds with others is we have a seed library that was actually founded by library staff, and they clean and collect seed on campus so we know its local genotype, and then they share that with the community to take home for a couple weeks out of the year. And these plant lists that we create and share with the rest of the Asheville community, we break down by bloom time, and so we have our spring, our summer, and our fall blooming species, because we do try to plant across the seasons so that we have that food source for our pollinators from early spring to late fall. So a red bud is something on our campus that blooms quite early, and the asters are a good food source later in the fall. And I really like the way that the Chattanooga Area Pollinator Partnership illustrated the bloom times for their plant list. And just like we consider all the seasons, we like to consider the entire life cycle of our pollinators. So they're only in that, our bees are really on that adult life stage for about 4 to 6 weeks. So we need to make sure that they're happy the rest of the time as well. And 70% of our native bees are ground nesters. So what we try to do is leave areas of sparsely vegetated soil, ideally in sunny south-facing, well-draining areas. And then we avoid mulching and tilling in those areas to invite our ground nesters. And in the lower left, you can see one of the ground nesters' nests on our campus. And similarly, we try to make sure there's habitat for our cavity nesters too, which is the other 30% of our native bees. So we have these, this is bamboo here in our bee hotel, and you can see that the bees are making use of it. And this was a reed I split open at one of our outreach events to show people what's going on inside of those cavity nests. And you can see we have about 20 brood cells in there, which is great. And something else we do is we leave standing dead snags like this as long as it's not a safety issue. And you can see when we zoom in up close on that, it is being utilized by some of our cavity nesting bees. And we try not to prune back dead stems in areas of campus where we can get away with it. Another thing that we like to talk about is, wildflowers get a lot of attention for pollinators, but we want to make sure people don't forget the importance of trees and shrubs and grasses. And so this was written into our pollinator habitat plan. And these charts were taken from Doug Tallamy's Bringing Nature Home, which really kind of illustrate the importance of trees and woody species for some of our pollinators. This is specifically catered to butterflies and moths, but you can see the big difference there. And these trees are just great, not only food sources, but overwintering sites and larval hosts. And I included this picture because we have pawpaws on campus, and they are the only host species for zebra swallowtails. And this is just kind of an example of how we integrate all of those different levels into some of our pollinator habitat. So we have our ground covers, which can help suppress the weeds, especially when you're not using mulch to give space for those ground nesting bees. And we have some grasses in here, which are, also larval hosts and also stabilize the soil for ground nesters. We have our flowers, which are the food source, and then, trees and shrubs are great, like windbreaks and shade when necessary. Another thing that's in our pollinator habitat plan is to just designate pollinator gardens, and these areas have stricter standards for management. And so this map just shows some of our pollinator gardens, and most of these we don't spray. We restrict mowing, especially during certain times of the year, and we primarily plant natives. And the only exception to the natives is if we are planting some edibles that aren't native. And also, in addition to our pollinator gardens, we also do not spray on our inner campus, which was actually a student-led campaign that our grounds crew decided to implement as well. And so we do not spray areas on campus, but we do spray in some places. But we do try to minimize chemical inputs with the use of an integrated pest management plan. And our ground supervisor went through and listed all of our major pests on campus and really tried to focus on prevention. So we have different strategies for prevention and thresholds for treatment, because we may not need to spray or even weed if it's in an area where it's not going to become invasive. And then a great way to get support for your habitat management plan and move it forward is to integrate it into other programs or to have it to support existing policies. So our university policies state that we'll effectively manage our natural resources and that we'll model sustainable campus practices. So I always, whenever we try to get a new garden approved or anything like that, we can show how it reflects our values as a university. And then we integrate it into existing programs. In the bottom left, we have volunteers twice a day where faculty, staff, and students sign up for a 1-hour volunteer shift, and these 3 were in charge of restocking the bee hotel. And then a really kind of easy marriage is incorporating pollinators into our edible gardens. So there's some lemon balm and fennel, and we have our pollinators in there as well. And we have some summer camp students who the camp was hosted on our campus, and we had them help us build one of our permaculture and pollinator gardens as well. Here's another example of integrating pollinator initiatives into existing programs. So we were building a stormwater control. And this is what it looked like before. It was just a lawn, but we rerouted the roof drains of a small building to build a couple little pocket wetlands, and we just loaded it with native pollinator plants. And it was also the same year that our local Fish and Wildlife field office was unloading a bunch of milkweed. So we planted a bunch of that, and within the same season, it was just loaded with monarchs. Another easy activity or easy way to get pollinator habitat is to kind of utilize what we would call waste spaces. So this is just a back door of a utility room, that it doesn't get a lot of visitors. It's kind of just a wasted space, but one of our grounds crew members turned it into a pollinator garden. And so the bees love it, and it looks a lot nicer. Another good example is we have these power line right-of-ways that were previously managed by Duke Energy, who owns the power lines, but we took over management from them. They were just spraying a couple times a year, and now it just, it doesn't look particularly attractive, but there's a lot of good stuff for pollinators going on in there. And then just little pocket gardens like this one, which is sandwiched between 2 buildings, that gets really little attention, but one of our grounds crew recently just took out what was dominated by microcaesium and replaced it with some violets and penstemon and trillium and euchera, and the ground nesters moved in pretty soon after. And the last part of our pollinator habitat plan is kind of redefine what a beautiful landscape is. So I think a lot of people have a preconceived notion of what a college campus should look like, and it's the English ivy and the vast expanses of lawns and the hedges. So we're trying to kind of change that so people are more comfortable with this wilder landscape, which I think is beautiful as well. So I guess part of this redefining the beautiful landscape is where the bridge from our pollinator habitat plan to signage happens, which is the other commitment that I'm going to talk to you about today. And so an important thing to consider first is audience. And if your campus is like ours, we cater to 3 different classes of audience. We have just our campus community, we have the general public, and then we have visiting groups that have more particular interests. So this isn't really a sign, it's more of a display, but this was a pollinator info book pull at our library, and so they sent all these out, and the audience here is really our campus community. This is another summer camp activity, and they wanted to know, how bees navigate. So this is a really specific sign for a really specific age group. And down here we have a group of landscape managers, which is a really niche audience as well. So just understanding who your audience is pretty important. And then location obviously is important too, especially if your information is site specific. So this sign is about using plants for stream bank restoration, and it's on the stream, so that's important. But it's also on our the city's greenway, which runs through campus as well. So it gets a lot of pedestrian traffic. So hopefully a lot of visitors seeing the sign. And these are signs in our two of our pollinator gardens, and you can see we mow so that people can approach the gardens and look at them. This garden on the right is not ADA accessible, unfortunately, but the one on the left is. Size, just you have a lot of options is basically the takeaway from this. I think this one is 4 feet wide, and this one might be 4 inches. So depending on what you're trying to communicate, you have options there. Content. So these are just some signs that we're working on to go on the back side of our bee hotel. And one of the main things is to provoke curiosity. And sometimes you can do that by asking a question on your sign. I think in this case, the bee hotel itself provokes curiosity. Another important thing for content is to relate it to everyday life of the audience. And I think once you start reading about bees, you see this fun fact that comes up a lot, and that's the one that says 1 out of every 3 bites of food that we eat are insect pollinated. I think we see that often because it's effective in being highly relatable to the audience. Other things reveal a unique viewpoint. I think that approaching kind of pollinator health through the lens of our cavity nesting bees, which is a little bit different and people aren't as familiar with, has been an advantage for us. And then, we try to address the big picture and encourage respect and ethical behavior as well. More content things. So what does your audience want to know? So these are signs for the bee hotel. And before we started making signs, we hosted some events there, and I just kind of logged all of the questions that we were getting. One of the most common ones is are they going to sting me? So we did try to put that on the front of the bee hotel so people felt comfortable approaching it, and obviously having an illustration of what's going on inside of some of those nest tubes is important as well. I added this, function. Not all signage needs to be permanent, and I found that some temporary signage can help by avoiding content from getting stale. A lot of times the temporary signs can be more affordable, and it's easier to get approval for. So if you wanted to put a permanent sign on your main quad, that might be an issue, but if you wanted to do something that only lasted 4 to 6 weeks, that would be easier. At least on our campus, that's how it works. And there's some practical things associated as well as far as installation. So one of our sites, we didn't want to pour concrete footers to install a signpost, so we used these 18-inch aluminum screws instead. And then these are some great temporary signs that were actually given to us by the North Carolina Urban Forestry Council, which have been really effective. And just were up for a couple months on campus. Another, word of advice is just utilize the available resources. There's so many posters and signs available that are really well done, and so don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. And all of these resources are great. So I encourage you to check some of those out. Another quick note on sourcing images. We use open source purchase illustrations and some student-generated illustrations. So we just, get what we can. But for those of you who aren't aware, you can search Google by license to find some open source photos. So this is a nice one down here that's free for public use. the 3 illustrations at the bottom we actually purchased as part of like a larger set. Maybe there were 6 or 7 of them, and it was $100, but we've gotten a lot of use out of them. So I think that was worth it. And then this one up here, just harnessing the talent of some of our students. This is for one of our stormwater signs, but she's going to work on stuff for our pollinator signage as well. And quick on some lessons learned, like stuff like QR codes, we don't use those anymore. This sign, I was, being kind of cheap, and I just tried to use something like a laminated poster to talk about one of our mini bee hotels on campus, but really need some of that outdoor weather resistant materials if you're going to put anything outside. And even though outdoor and weather resistant ones just need some maintenance every once in a while, so there's some condensation and some dust that's gotten under some of our other signs as well. I think that's it, so I'll pass it over to Elaine.
Thank you, everyone. This is Elaine Cole from Portland Community College, our Rock Creek campus. I'm the sustainability coordinator, and I'm just going to highlight some of our efforts to engage our campus and the public through our communications, and also talk about some of the planning and hosting of awareness events. I'll be spinning off of some of the comments from Emily and Jackie. This is our campus. Portland Community College has about 75,000 students. We have 4 main campuses and 6 centers throughout the Portland metro area. And I'm housed at the Rock Creek campus. Here's an aerial view of it. It's about 264 acres. It's an old farm. We still have a working farm on campus, but right there in the front, you see our learning garden. And it is kind of the main showcase of our campus and where we started our apiary and what spun off our Bee Campus USA efforts. Here it's a non-toxic pesticide and herbicide free space, and though our apiary has moved locations, it still serves as an educational piece to draw public and student, staff, and faculty, and is been the precedent for our other campuses in getting learning gardens. I want to talk about some of the communication efforts that we've done and that you might be interested in doing with your Bee Campus USA. Since we've been established in the 2016, we got up and running, and we were inspired in 2015 by Southern Oregon University at an ASHE conference. So that's very fun to see the expansion of the programs. But here's our logo that we created. A student did this for us, and we've taken that and branded just about anything you could imagine. This year, yesterday we were just sporting our Bee Campus USA t-shirts we had. These are little journals we had printed with our logo on. They're made of apple peels, and they're a special giveaway for our committee members and for other supporters. These are seed giveaways with our logo and tagline, and help spread the word. These are window clings. Of course, we have buttons, and we're working on other things that will roll out in our next webinar we do, but these are just some of the things that we're doing. This lower brochure is an example of how we've raised money and some revenue by creating opportunities for campus members and the community broader to donate to our Bee Campus USA efforts in our apiary. Of course, we're always happy to fly the Bee Campus USA flag like we were yesterday in support of Pollinator Week at our events. And that's another great way to communicate your efforts, and not only for pollinators, but your committee on campus. And a super popular way that we do, like other campuses, is sell our honey. And we've started to extract and get honey from our apiary and use this as a fundraiser as well. And people love this. They are already asking me, when is the honey coming out? When can I buy it? And I will have to explain that, we'll wait for the season to run and extract in the fall. And so this has really been a great marketing effort for us and a good way to talk about our pollinator efforts. And I think like Jackie and Emily have stated before, we're piggybacking off of some of the other established events and marketing materials and things that are already out there. And in terms of creating awareness throughout the public and on campus and planning events, we've spun off of just already established events like Earth Week and now Pollinator Week. Here's an Earth Week event at one of our campuses, just focused on creating monarch habitat. Here's another effort that went into this spring, which combined so many different things on the Bee Campus USA list, but a pollinator garden that was created at our Rock Creek campus by class. So it could be combining that sort of community-based learning or service learning efforts. And you can see that we've got our signage up and ties right in with so many of the things that you need to do, but it's a great way for the public to see what we're doing, and I'm sure this will be beautiful in a couple of years as it gets established. We're also doing a lot, as I said, around Pollinator Week. This is from last year's efforts, and one of the things that was super engaging and fun for everybody was making seed bombs, which was a great experiential activity that allowed participants to learn about seeds and flowers, and then talking about where they could be planting these when they get home and spreading the pollinator habitat throughout the area. Again, I said Earth Week is another great, already established time when everybody's coming together, and we have just integrated pollinator education activities and events and education at at a number of our Earth Week events throughout our different campuses. And here's one at our annual Learning Garden Work Party, which draws a lot of students, and we had all sorts of fun things for them. And you can see the staff has got their Bee Campus USA t-shirts here that year. And we at our Rock Creek campus have our weekly farm stand from the food grown in our learning garden. This is Portlandia Farm Standia, and that runs April through October every Tuesday. And here's one of our Intel fellows that is helping us out. Here's myself, and we're just using that opportunity to educate about all things pollinator and talk about the food that we grow as well. That's a good way to piggyback. And we've been fortunate now as we've grown our program and our committee over the last few years that we're expanding to our other campuses. And we've been able to expand to our Sylvania campus, and this is our new apiary just this year. We got fundings to do that and placed it next to our learning garden. You can't see, but the learning garden is next to a small wooded plot, and that is where we place the apiary. And we have plans to just continue to expand our apiaries to our different campuses as we move forward. And the other thing that also is helping us is our creation of our beekeeping class from our campus beekeeper. And I think that's a great way to expand through not only your campus community, but also with the public coming on and taking classes. And our class fills every single quarter. So that's been very successful. And I think another thing that has been beneficial for us in expanding our efforts on campus and through the public is that staff like myself and my colleague, Briar Schoen, also our Intel fellow, Susan, she took the class. So we have more people on our campus that have been able to, that are in a staff capacity to be educated, and then that has helped us kind of break some of those barriers when we are meeting resistance with administration and saying, how are you going to maintain your apiary? What is this? What are the, how are you going to do the safety of it? And how can you assure us that this will be a viable program? And I think by having our staff take the class and demonstrate their commitment has really helped us in that effort. Like many of the campuses, we're always giving tours, not only to the preschoolers like you see here, but all the way to students and adult groups. So that helps us raise awareness through our efforts and also when we're hosting events. I wanted to highlight that we are educating the public through our viewing hives and our Bee Boutique. And this is a educational viewing hive, a top bar hive with a viewing window here that we purchased through a local community or local vendor in Portland, Oregon. And here's one of our latest Bee Boutiques in our learning garden at the Rock Creek campus. And of course, public and campus staff can walk through here, and we will have educational signage going up here as well. I think that kind of for us, that's something that's innovative and creative I wanted to highlight, other than some of the traditional awareness activities and communication events that folks are doing, is our reach has spread so far that people come to us with different things. And here's an example of a community member that brought us a bee stump that bees were in. He had cut it down and contacted our beekeeper and our campus staff to say, hey, could I bring it and put it up on your campus? And of course we said yes. So I thought that was a great example to demonstrate how our outreach through our communication efforts and our website and the events that we're doing has sparked engagement in our community. And here's this person who brought the bee stump through Urban Bees and Gardens. And here's the bee stump today, this summer. And you can see it's at a nice little grassy meadow area. And the thing that we're doing now to broaden our communication to the public in the campus is to work on installing a bee camera. Here's Anne Lassen. She's our beekeeper on campus. She works in our landscaping department. And another one of our Intel fellows, Steve, right here, a retired engineer. One of his jobs is to integrate a bee cam into this bee stump. So we're working collaboratively, and this is just this spring we're working on this. So he's taking all the dimensions and getting everything set up to try to figure out how we can construct a box to fit the technology and the camera into that bee stump that you just saw. So this is happening just in the last weeks. He's trying to figure out how we can, oftentimes through repurposed materials, which I'm really supporting him doing. And here he's demonstrating where the bee camera is going to go and how he's going to get this other window over, and then what happens if the bees propolize it, and how are we going to be able to see from the top and then access the bee camera. And so in the last few weeks, the little bee camera did arrive, and of course we're working on figuring out how do we get a signal out to the area where the bee stump is, and then how are we going to get this set up for the feed so that the public can view it. And we know this has been done before, but it's still, anyway, from our perspective, somewhat innovative technology and trying to figure out how we're going to pull it all together. So this is a great project for a retired engineer who's very creative. Here's the beekeeping class from this spring. So I had Steve teach them about what he's working on and how he plans to figure it out. And so that was a real win-win in that respect. So tune in for that progression, and hopefully you'll be seeing our BCAM live feed from Portland Community College in the summer or fall, and that'll be a fantastic way for us to spread our Bee Campus USA efforts and the pollinator efforts. And so I just want to thank everybody for this opportunity, and take it away, Phyllis.
I'm trying to get my my PowerPoint up, and oh, this is where I left off. Sorry. You'll have to excuse me while I fast forward here. Let's see. So you're getting a review of everything you just heard. And now I'm going to wrap it up with the annual renewal process for B Campus affiliates. So here we go. This is the last commitment. Every January 31st, once you've been certified for a full 12 months, we ask that you tell us what you did the year before. And so the way we do that is we have Google Forms for updating your basic contact information, and we have a metrics form to just give us some idea of the scope of what you've been doing. And we try to include a box for just about any kind of information. So we don't expect you to fill in every box, but we try to have a place for everything so that we can really celebrate what all of the campuses achieved the last year. And that over time, we can create a cumulative record of just what has been achieved through the program. And that will help us, that will help you, it will help with fundraising, but most importantly, it tells us whether or not what we're doing is having an impact. Are we creating more habitat for pollinators? And then the other two things are an online narrative report. You can go to reports.bcdusa.org and look at the reports that are up there for 2017. And I hope you'll be impressed, because we certainly are. We're just in awe of what each B campus is achieving. And then lastly, there's the renewal fee, just like the initial fee, and it's based on your student population size. I misspelled stars, I just realized, but you can actually get 2 special credit points for being a B Campus USA in the ASHE STARS program. It's in the ground section. So just want you to know about that. And I also wanted you to know that Elaine will also be speaking with another representative from another B campus, Dr. Brent Adrian, at the ASHE annual conference this fall. So be sure to check them out. Their session is a combined presentation, and it's called Get Your Buzz, Strategies for Becoming Certified B Campus. I'd also like you to know that Mike Oxendine, who was responsible for the B Campus USA program, because at Southern Oregon University, he and his colleagues were so excited they asked us to invent it. He'll be speaking at the Professional Grounds Management Society's annual meeting in October about B Campus USA. So that's the chance to meet with the inspiration behind the program. With that, I'd just like to wrap up by saying that I hope you realize now, after hearing just 3 examples, how different our B Campus program affiliates are. Some of them really emphasize the honeybee more than others. You don't have to emphasize the honeybee at all. They work out of their PIRGs, and they can be student driven through the Public Interest Research Group program on college campuses. And I have to say, they have been incredible recruiters for us for a lot of the campuses that have applied. And we're so grateful to them. I couldn't agree more with Emily's point about the program being grass tops and grassroots. We ask that every committee absolutely have somebody from the grounds department, and if we get an application and it shows a committee list that doesn't include somebody from the grounds department, we say, why don't you work on that and then come back when you found your connection to the grounds department, and then you can finalize your application. But it's just not going to work if you don't have buy-in from your grounds department. But all committees ideally should have a nice cross section with administration, students, sustainability staff, and faculty. Some of them even include folks from off campus. So you can be really creative with that, whatever works for you. So the campuses are our best recruiters, and I encourage you to look at their reports and to visit their campuses, to follow up with us if you have questions. I've provided our email addresses here. And with that, I'll say thanks to ASHE for hosting this webinar, and I hope you have some questions. We'd love to try to answer them for you.
Thank you so much, Phyllis, and thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your expertise with us today. As Phyllis said, we will now turn to our audience for questions. Before we start, I'd like to remind everyone you can submit your questions via the questions pane on the GoToWebinar control panel. I also want to mention that in 2016, one of our award winners was Southern Oregon University, and you can find their case studies as well as their conference presentation in the hub. And I searched for all the resources that we have in the Campus Sustainability Hub related to bees and pollinators. And there's about 25 or 30 that come up. If you use the link that I just shared with all the audience, you will find previous case studies and other resources that, including a previous webinar that we have for bees and pollinators. So let's get to our questions, because we already have a couple that we received, and I have a few questions that I will address to all of our panelists. So let's go in the order that you presented, with Phyllis providing the first answer, then Emily, Jackie, and Elaine. So can you please let me know how receptive your ground staff has been to new and stricter grounds plans and integrated pest management plans? So Phyllis, if you have any insight from the campuses that you've worked on, and then we'll go to Emily, Jackie, and Elaine for their experience on their campuses.
It'll be interesting to see what my colleagues say, but I can tell you that because we discourage anybody from applying without having the buy-in of their grounds department, it doesn't seem to have been a big problem for the ones who have been certified so far.
Yeah, I found that the ground staff were very receptive to our ideas, but it started fairly small because it's a campus and that requires a lot of approval to change. I mean, we constantly have new construction projects and new on-campus developments. So to try and integrate a new pollinator habitat is a little bit more difficult, but it ended up working like a ladder. So we started with the student farm, where students have the most control. And then that work served as an example for the ground staff to be more okay with us introducing grounds plans that are pollinator friendly. So those will be actually implemented for us in the fall. As far as the integrated pest management plan goes, that was already something that the school had implemented and the ground staff have been very much so a part of.
Hi, this is Jackie. Our grounds staff was like one of the leaders in our in kind of making stricter guidelines. There were individual grounds members who had already made like personal decisions not to like spray chemicals in their maintenance zone, and the grounds supervisor was giving them the freedom to make that decision. And so they've been really supportive the whole time. I mean, our grounds staff are just like plant lovers and kind of geek out on native plants anyway. One of our grounds staff members has her master's degree in pollinator studies, so she's been like a really integral member of our Bee Campus committee. So our ground staff has been way more of an asset than any kind of roadblock for us.
This is Elaine from Portland Community College. Yes, our ground staff they're just rock stars, and supportive and receptive, and were key initial members of our committee and continue to be on board. So I can't say enough about them.
Thank you very much. So a second question for all of you. is where do you even start? So if a campus is just looking at starting this process of becoming a Bee Friendly campus and a certified campus, who should be on your team from the beginning?
Well, this is Phyllis, and what we always advise is take the easy way out. Find your friends, find people who are really supportive of the idea of having a pollinator-friendly campus, and build from there. And don't rush it. There's no reason to rush it. We discourage that. We like for it to grow organically, no pun intended. And so it builds. And so if you invite people to engage and to have input and welcome them at the table, usually what happens is they volunteer, they hold up their hands and say, I'd like to help. But you have to open up that door and make it a really wide open invitation for everybody to get involved.
Yeah, I definitely say making that an invitation is the best way to get people in the door. I mean, when I set out to run the campaign, I had no idea what I was going to do. And then finding Bee Campus, well, that opened the door to students, but sending out that first email blast to all of the environmental key administrators, faculty, and staff on campus really helped connect me to different people. But that would be step one. Step two is get on a call with Phyllis, because then you can kind of talk out what you need to do and where you can go from there. Or just send an email, because I have to say she was so helpful, and I remember being in a bit of a panic saying, what do I do to get started? And that initial calls kind of set the guidelines.
Yeah, this is Jackie again. I'll kind of echo what Emily said. We are lucky enough at UNC Asheville to live in the same city as Phyllis, so she actually came to our first Bee Campus planning committee. At that point, we weren't certified, but that's how we started. Is we got all of our stakeholders in one room together, and just started kind of dividing up the responsibilities of the application process.
This is Elaine. I agree with everybody and what has been said. So a couple suggestions. I think it's nice if you do some personal specific asks if you want to start your committee. And then from the personal asks, I agree with Emily, do an email blast, because there are some people out there in staff, faculty, or even students that have passions or interests, or are amateur beekeepers, or pollinator lovers that you don't know about, and you could get somebody that is so passionate that you'd never even thought of for your committee. So there is that. And then the last thing I would say is because I remember feeling a little bit overwhelmed in the beginning too, but once you get that committee and galvanize folks, then they are all bringing their expertise and passion and are able to then sort of help you, fill out and round out your initial projects and ideas.
Thank you very much. We have an interesting question. So how difficult was it to convince risk management to allow such programs with insects that sting? Do all participants sign off on release of liability? Are EpiPens everywhere? How do you handle that?
Let me just, this is Phyllis again, say that we have campuses and cities who want to have honeybees, and we have other ones who don't want to have honeybees. And as I said before, either way is fine. But the reason I bring that up is because the solitary bees don't sting, and of course no male bees have stingers. And so it's only the bumblebees and the honeybees that you have to be concerned about from the stinging perspective. And so that's all part of the educational process to make your administration aware that not all bees sting, first of all. And I'm going to stop there and let each of the other panelists address how their campus deals with that question.
What we found was that It's more often people like to just joke about it. Like if I had $1 for every single time someone asked me if we were going to hand out bees as a favor, I probably would be able to pay for my education. Regardless, I think that there's a way to be hands-on without actually being that close to something that could pose a risk or a threat. And I think that students and administrators acknowledge that risk. So we wouldn't actually put students in a situation where they would be handling a bee box without speaking to administration and considering liability waivers or having the appropriate attire ready. We would generally just create the environment and then observe.
Yeah, to kind of echo what Phyllis has said, we focus a lot of our outreach events around the solitary nesting bees, which don't sting and are less aggressive. We do have honeybee hives on campus as well. And to appease our health and safety folks, we just wrote up a really basic safety plan, which basically says, like, if someone gets stung, keep an eye on it, and if they're having trouble breathing, call an ambulance is the gist of it. And I'd be happy to share that with anyone who's interested. But we just keep our honeybee hives like not on a major like pedestrian traffic route, and that's how we handled it.
This is Elaine from Portland Community College. I have a couple suggestions. Initially, if you're concerned about getting administrators on board, and that was the case for me when I came on campus, I had said, why don't we have beehives? And people just said, oh, it's been tried before. No, but it's not going to work. You can't do it, Elaine. And so I thought about that for a while, but I'm a behavior change expert. So I just looked at what the barriers were to administration, getting on board. And that's there's a lot of things, and you have to look at what your audience is and where you are, and then just addressing those specific barriers. And then I, along with our beekeeper, we pitched it. So I really targeted what I knew were their concerns. And then secondly, I'd say, I mentioned staff getting trained, and we've done that in terms of the safety issue. We've gotten, everybody's first aid and CPR trained, and then we have on our campus, we have to get a 2-hour EpiPen training, and then we can have the EpiPens near. So that's another way that we have addressed that.
Thank you very much. So Jackie, I have a question for you. What was your sign budget and who paid for it?
We've had the funding sources have come from a couple different areas. Our Department of Sustainability is sponsoring the ones that will be on the back side of the Bee Hotel. And then some of the interpretive signage in our main entrance pollinator garden was part of that Burt's Bees grant that also funded the garden itself, also funded the signs. And then some of the grounds department as well has helped fund some of the signs. So we just cast a wide net and definitely pursue grants for that as well.
Thank you. And did the seed bombs work?
I think Elaine did the seed bombs.
Okay. Sorry, Elaine, did the seed bombs work?
I believe so. It just it depends on when people throw them out and where they go. So I'm sure there can be some failure, but they should, even if they're lying dormant for a while, some seeds should emerge when they get water and sun.
All right, thank you. Somebody is asking about the Burt's Bees grant that has been mentioned. Can you provide more information about that?
Let's see. I could with a follow-up email. That was before my time on campus, but I could dig and find it for whoever's asking. If my contact info is still up on the screen, so if you email me, I'll get it to you.
And Jackie, I could weigh in on that. This is Phyllis.
Okay.
I actually wrote that grant.
And, thanks.
And Burt's Bees is based in Durham, North Carolina, and so their grants are limited to North Carolina, and they're mostly limited to the greater Durham area. So I don't know who asked the question, but just so you know, they do have geographic limitations.
Thank you, Phyllis. And there's a couple of questions for you. So if applying for only one campus in a multi-campus college, is the application fee based on that campus's population or the college as a whole?
No, just that one campus.
Okay. And does a campus apply prior to beginning the project, like with the implementation plan, or after all steps have been met?
No, you can apply before all the steps have been met. What we're interested in is the commitment. We want you to get buzzy just as quickly as you can. And so much of the value of the process is bringing that committee together to make decisions because they're all getting educated along the way. It's a beautiful learning process for your campus. So we don't want you to wait until you finish everything. This is going to be a year in and year out effort where every year you do more and more, you learn more and more people get involved. And so getting the certification is kind of the first step, not the last step.
Thank you. And how many B campuses are located within B cities? Is there an incentive to pursue both certification, like a campus collaborating with a city to pursue both?
Oh, what a great question. You know, I've never actually sat down and totaled them up. There are quite a few. And interestingly enough, sometimes it's the campus that encourages its city to become a B city before the campus becomes a B campus. So there is an awful lot of collaboration that goes on, and it really creates lots of opportunities. What we always like to say is that what makes the B Campus USA program so appealing is that a campus pretty much has absolute control over its campus grounds. And so it can serve as a wonderful model of what pollinator habitat actually looks like and how you maintain it, that sort of thing. Whereas a city, you know, the actual municipality owns very little of the land within the municipality. Mostly it's privately owned. And so it can use its bully pulpit to influence what its citizenry does, but it really can't control very much of the landscape in the municipality. And so with the two of those working in tandem, the campuses and the city together, oh my goodness, just think what they can accomplish.
Thank you, Phyllis. And if you are certified, does that mean you can never use pesticides again?
Not at all. I think Jackie mentioned that they do use some pesticides when they've exhausted all of the other avenues to address a pest problem, and that they have certain areas that they consider completely pesticide free. What we ask you to do is to have a very thoughtful conversation about how you're going to manage pests way before you encounter a pest problem, and then you have a plan, and then when you actually encounter that pest problem down the road, not only do you have a plan, but you have a number of alternatives. Hopefully, with the measures you've taken will prevent those pest problems, but sometimes, you know, you're going to have pest problems. It just happens. And so each campus has the latitude to decide how they're going to address those issues.
Thank you so much. We have one more question for all of our panelists. So if anyone else has a question, please do submit it now. So do you have some best practices and tips for collaborating with the community, the surrounding community on these initiatives? And you may have already said some, but if you have any, final thoughts on that question. So let's start with Phyllis again.
As in terms of best practices and tips, it all goes back to those connections that Emily talked about, and being very transparent. And so if you do build relationships, I mean, of course, I'm most familiar with Asheville and our surrounding B cities and B campuses. We're in the midst right now of having our pollination celebration sometimes we call it a month, sometimes we call it a week. This year it's almost a month of events throughout our community. And so we had a pollinator garden tour on Saturday, and we asked UNC Asheville if they would be willing to be on that tour. And as Jackie and her colleagues always do, they did a fantastic job and offered the opportunity for people to build bee boxes as they stop by to look at the bee hotel and the pollinator gardens. So that's just one small example, but we have faculty who are really active members of their community, and so they do a lot of collaboration within the community. So I don't feel like this is a great answer, but what seems to work really, really well is just being open and transparent and welcoming any kind of involvement that's offered from both sides. And don't worry about who gets the credit. That's what stops us so many times. We're so concerned about who gets the credit that it interferes with achieving really great things.
Yeah, I definitely want to reemphasize that point about connections and be a little bit of a salesman. Like, take a business card, take a business card or take a flyer or just present the facts however you want and go to the people that you want to be a part of your efforts. Because if you make it seem beneficial and you really show how important this cause is, people will see that and they'll want to be a part of it. And if you make it fun and exciting, they'll want to be a part of it. So sell it, and sell it like you mean it. And that's actually how I found we got connected to so many people on a statewide level. Like, I was talking to the Connecticut Historical Society at one point about doing a bee exhibit. So it's just being there, being present, and talking to people as like you want them to be a part of what you're doing.
Yeah, this is Jackie again. I mean, we have just not. I think what happened with us is we once we built the bee hotel, that was such kind of like a charismatic project that we started getting a lot of community partners asking for tours and ideas for partnerships to the point where it's almost overwhelming sometimes. So if you can have like, I don't know, something that's kind of charismatic like that, and just to help you get the word out. I mean, all these newspapers and magazines wanted to do a story on it. We were on NPR, so that just one individual project really kind of led to a lot of community partners for us.
This is Elaine. I echo the same from my colleagues with a couple specifics. Call up your local master gardener group, and secondly, join a local bee club.
Thank you. We're a little bit over time, but I will ask this one last question to Phyllis quickly. Have you worked, or should campuses work with local beekeeping associations? Because this person's experienced associations are eager to educate and volunteer.
Absolutely, and this goes back to my earlier statement that you just have no idea how many allies you have out there. I've been amazed at the Boy Scouts and the garden clubs and the the churches, the businesses. And so the bee clubs are kind of no-brainers because, first of all, they're not afraid of bees. And so the pleasant surprise for me has been that my fellow beekeepers have been oftentimes interested in learning about the native bees that were here long before the Europeans brought the bees in the 1800s. And I'm sorry, in the 1600s. And so it just, it piques their interest, and some of your best allies could be the bee clubs.
Thank you so much, Phyllis, Elaine, Jackie, and Emily. We're at the end of our webinar. I wanted to remind everyone about next week's webinar, which will provide a background on why universities should calculate their nitrogen footprint. You can learn more about this webinar and our other professional development offerings on our website, A reminder to all to please fill out the post-webinar survey. Thank you so much for being with us today, and have a great day.